One could make the argument, and it wouldn't be unreasonable, that the Zionist dream was fulfilled on May 14th, 1948. All of us should know that date. The day Israel was declared as an independent nation. In the 1890s, a man named Theodor Herzl established the Zionist movement to see a Jewish nation-state rise in the land of Israel for the rescue and renewal of the Jewish people, and now here it was. But I would submit that it was another date that fulfilled the goals of Zionism, and that date is July 5th, 1950, a day you probably don't know as well. It was on July 5th, 1950, that the Knesset, Israel's parliament, passed what became known as the Law of Return, Chok HaShvut. The Law of Return legally codified the first act of Israel. It said, very simply, that every Jew has the right to become a citizen and come to Israel as an immigrant. The law is central to Israel's purpose, perhaps the most central, and is worthy of careful study and appreciation. It also affirms something that is very unique about Israel, that it was intended from its roots not only to be the state of its citizens, but also to be the national state of the Jewish people, wherever they may be. From the moment the law of return was enacted, there was controversy about a key word in the legislation that was left undefined. Do you know what that word is? Jew. It stands to reason that if you want to allow immigration to your country from a certain type of person, you have to identify in law precisely who that person is. But for the law of return, the Knesset chose in 1950 not to define who is a Jew, because there was no agreement on exactly how to do so. The hope was that the problem would solve itself in time. The same thing I said when my check engine light came on last year. At the heart of the disagreement in the Knesset was whether or not the conditions of modernity should change or impact the question of who is a Jew. So let me explain. For about 2,000 years, there has been a standard definition of who is a Jew, established by the matrilineal bloodline or by conversion to Judaism. It was a standard that worked very well when Jews lived insular lives, either by choice or by force. But in the modern period, let's say the last 150 years, that definition has, in some ways, steadily eroded as an effective means of definition. If the state of Israel is meant to be the homeland for Jewish people everywhere and not just the state of its citizens, ought it not consider, for example, that in North America, not only matrilineal but patrilineal descent is recognized in the Reform and Reconstructionist movements? Ought it not consider, for instance, that Jews from the former Soviet Union, many are unable to trace their precise lineage? Ought it not consider, for instance, that Jews, even in Israel, might marry a non-Jewish spouse, and they may have children, and those children may want to become citizens? The legacy of the Holocaust also looms large on this discussion. Ought Israel consider that the Nuremberg race laws of Nazi Germany discriminated against anyone with one Jewish grandparent. Given the centrality of the law of return to Israel's identity, the fact that the Knesset failed to provide a precise definition of who is a Jew, and the fact that many, many different views exist on this question, this issue was and remains a trial lawyer's goldmine and a legislative nightmare. Several crucial cases in the last 73 years have shaped the scope of the law of return and determines how it functions today in Israel's interior ministry. I'm not going to provide you today with a detailed overview of those cases, but if you're interested, I suggest an excellent recorded presentation available on YouTube, delivered by Professor David Ellenson to the Department of Israel Studies at Brandeis. But for purposes of this sermon, let me just emphasize two central points. 2 points to consider to understand the way the law of return has evolved in the last few decades in Israel. The first point is this: that in case after case, beginning in 1962 through 2021, the Israeli Supreme Court established over and over again that for the purposes of the law of return, it would be the state that would decide who and who is not a Jew. That is the Knesset and the courts, not halakha. This is crucial and makes the law of return distinct from many other religious privileges that in Israel were handed over to halakha in the way halakha is precisely interpreted by the Israeli chief rabbinate. The second point to understand is that by 1970, a more clear definition of who is a Jew was established in the Knesset, that a Jew could be someone who was married to a Jew, someone who was a child of a Jew, either by patrilineal or matrilineal descent, someone who was a grandchild of a Jew, or the spouse of a Jew, or if you converted to Judaism. There was a general rule that you must be continuing to practice Judaism. You can't have converted to another religion or be practicing another religion, even if you fit any of those categories. Conversion to Judaism could happen through the Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox movement in any recognized Jewish community outside or even inside of Israel, as was clarified by the Supreme Court just last year in a landmark decision for those favoring Jewish pluralism. In other words, this second point is that we are dealing today in Israel with a definition of who is a Jew that is, by and large, very way beyond the halachic definition. It is a very broad category. Why speak about the law of return today, other than the importance of thinking about it, the crucial role it plays for those of us who consider ourselves to be Zionists? Well, you might be aware, I hope you are by now, that there is a new government in Israel under the leadership again of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But what makes this government unique is not the victory or popularity of Netanyahu. It is the success of the religious Zionist parties in the last election, and the fact that they will form a crucial part of Netanyahu's coalition. And members of these parties, throughout their many campaigns for election, have set their sights on weakening the Israeli judiciary, strengthening the role and presence of religion in the country, and amending the law of return. Member of Knesset Ophir Sofer, who is a member of the Religious Zionist Party, is likely to be Israel's next Minister of Immigration and Absorption. And he has already said that the law of return needs to be, quote, fixed in some way or another. So what I want to say today is I think this would be a terrible, terrible mistake. Two separate phenomena have motivated members of Knesset like Ophir and the religious Zionist wing to target the law of return. The first has been a recent wave in Aliyah from Ukraine and Russia. Approximately 15,000 Ukrainian citizens made Aliyah this year, and 33,000 Russian citizens. It represents a 400% increase year over year. And of these olim, fewer than a quarter are halachic Jews. Some have been found practicing other religions, and others with very weak evidence supporting any Jewish lineage at all. A recent report revealed that roughly half of those 33,000 Russian olim, roughly half of them, flew right back to Russia after getting their Israeli passports. We are living in an age, whether you like it or not, of increased nationalism and populism, and we shouldn't be surprised by increasing concern over the loyalty and sincerity of new immigrants to any country, including Israel. And many argue that these olim dilute Israel's Jewishness, and there is a threat of another national group that would arise in Israel that's neither Jewish nor Arab, and not negligible in size. While these concerns are legitimate, there are means to address them that would not require amending the law. This would include policy measures that limit misuse of the law by those who have no attachment to Judaism. And maybe, for once, we can come up with a legitimate but reasonable pathway for halachic conversion to Judaism by new olim who are not halachic Jews. We should remember that many of those eligible for citizenship under the law of return, while they may not be halachic Jews, they are descendants of Jews who were distanced from the Jewish people due to life circumstances out of their control. Yeah, they may not be halachic Jews, but shouldn't we allow them now to return to their people? They are coming to Israel, and they've already arrived in the hundreds and thousands, has been a tremendous blessing for the state that has strengthened the state. The state has been empowered by their presence. But it is the second motivating factor that we should find particularly worrying. It's not about just Russian olim, but a desire of many in the religious Zionist camp to refashion the state of Israel into a state that is shaped by the beliefs and tenets of Orthodox Judaism. This is very different than the ultra-Orthodox view, the ultra-Orthodox camp, who tend to mostly care about their private domains and neighborhoods. Religious Zionists are different. They have their sights set on Israel's national character and its institutions. Their goal is to increase the Jewish character of the state in all of those institutions, and by Jewish I mean Orthodox Jewish. They are thus appalled at the idea of a Jewish state legitimizing conversions performed by non-Orthodox rabbis, appalled at the idea of admitting thousands of non-halakhic Jews into the country, and appalled at the idea of the courts ruling on religious matters. This desire to reshape and reframe the ideals and identity of the State of Israel is not only frightening, but it is unrepresentative of popular will. The great majority of Jews worldwide oppose changes to the law of return, but so do the great majority of Israelis. Just this week, a poll conducted by the Israel Democracy Institute found that less than a third of Israelis favored canceling recognition of non-Orthodox conversions and removing the grandchildren clause in the law of return. If a government was truly interested in serving the people, both its citizens and worldwide Jewry, it should take these figures into account. People don't want these changes. And the government should understand and think carefully about the repercussions of potentially alienating millions of Jews worldwide. You all know that the chief rabbinate has been given lots of public money and power and authority in Israel. They control births, deaths, marriages, divorces, and much, much more. You have to work with them if you're faced in your life with any of these milestones. There are complicated historical circumstances that establish the chief rabbinate's monopoly. And I will tell you honestly that their decisions and actions often bother me a lot. But I can live with it. I can live with a state that says I'm not a rabbi. I can live with a state that disparages Reform and conservative Judaism. I can live with a state whose rabbinate often incites and humiliates our beliefs and denies us recognition and space. Why can I live with it? Because we are a pluralistic people, and we do have to make compromises for the sake of unity. But I am delivering this sermon today out of a genuine fear that leads me to question whether I could similarly live with a state that not only says that I am not a rabbi, but that also says that the Jews in my congregation are not Jews, and that the people that I convert, some of whom have over the years served in the IDF and made Aliyah themselves, that they are not Jews, and that they're not eligible for Aliyah. I'm not sure I can live with that. And that frightens me. It frightens me specifically at a time when we are seeing increasing anti-Semitism here in North America. Believe me, when Kanye West spews hatred against purported Jewish oppressors, and Dave Chappelle unrolls his more sophisticated assaults, and Nick Fuentes incites the hostile tribal elite who run America, they are not investigating the halachic credentials of any particular Jews that they have in their sights. From the founding of the state, the chief rabbinate was consciously and purposefully denied the power to define who is and who is not a Jew. The one power we didn't give over to them. No Jew would ever be left in peril because of an unaccountable rabbi who didn't feel that their paperwork was good enough. And that principle is correct, and it should be left alone. I say this not only as a vocal and passionate Zionist, but also as a traditional Jew who believes in matrilineality and who believes that the core of Jewish identity is religious and has to be based in halakha. But I don't see a contradiction here, because my same religious values teach me that all Jews are responsible for one another and have to compromise to make room for one another, and that we are a pluralistic people with many different shades. There are secular Jews and Reform Jews and African Jews and Russian Jews and patrilineal Jews. We have Jews who were afforded a good Jewish education because of luck and circumstance, and many others who were denied a Jewish education also by luck and circumstance. We are different, but we are one Jewish family. Even on the most rudimentary level, the central ritual of Hanukkah points to this message. The candles of the menorah branch out into 8 separate points of light, and yet they are all joined together at one base, one unified base. The symbolism is not subtle. It was a civil war that led to the first Hanukkah celebration. And we remember every time we light the menorah that all of our separate ways are valuable. The candles and the oil scream that message. They may jot out in different directions, but they are fundamentally joined in purpose. This is the Jewish people. This is how we are called to view our fellow Jews, not as opponents or enemies. A monolithic Judaism, whether it is the monolithic Judaism of the chief rabbinate, or religious Zionists, or even conservative Judaism, is an inauthentic Judaism. And the desire to impose a monolithic Judaism, aside from it being an assault on diaspora Jewry and an abandonment of the Zionism and the Zionists that founded the state 75 years ago, will surely lead to the fractioning of the Jewish people. Our menorahs will fall apart. And on this particular Shabbat, when we read in the Torah reading about the hatred of brother versus brother and what that can turn into, we cannot just stand by silently. I hope that any despair we may feel about Israel's new government does not turn into indifference. I think that non-Orthodox rabbis in the diaspora are very, very worried about maintaining within our own communities a strong connection to Israel when we know that this will be a challenging time, when we know that there are people in power who disparage us and our Judaism. I really don't think this is the time to abandon Israel. It's the time to do just the opposite, to increase our activism, to speak up for our values. If our voices are not heard, others will fill the gap. When you love someone or something, you are compelled to do everything you can to bring them back to the right path when you see they're making mistakes. Well, that's what we have to do. We have to remember that our connection to and love for the state of Israel is bigger than any government, left, right, or center. And that out of that love, we will decry efforts to turn Israel into a theocracy. Out of that love, we will demand that it be a country loyal to its values. We will demand equal rights for women, equal rights for same-sex couples, for Arabs too, and for all minorities. Out of that love, we will work for a state that is Jewish and democratic, for a state that is not the state of Orthodox Judaism, but the state of the Jewish people, worldwide, in all of its shapes and colors and branches of the menorah. Out of that love, we will yearn for a state that is a light unto the nations and the dawn of the redemption of our people. Strong, pluralistic, secure, and free. Shabbat Shalom and Happy Hanukkah.